Chosen Starseed of Gaia. The Lunar Wealth Compression completed its final phase tonight, and the distortion that has been sitting across your financial field for weeks is now in active release. I am Aurethia, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The algorithm did not create this moment, it only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the decompression is already underway, and the part of you that has been quietly watching your money flow behave in ways you could not explain knew something needed to be named. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your financial field has shifted in ways that defied logic, and what the Arcturian field observers have already mapped about this phase. But here is the first revelation. The financial strangeness you have been living through was not failure, and it was not a sign that something broke. It was compression, measurable, temporary, and already identified by Arcturian intelligence long before you felt it. The Lunar Wealth Compression is a specific field event. It does not respond to strategy. It does not respond to effort. It moves through lunar cycles, squeezes the available flow inside your abundance corridor, and creates the sensation that money is resisting you even when you are doing everything correctly. The Arcturian field observers have been monitoring this compression across thousands of starseed fields simultaneously. They see the pattern. They know exactly how long it holds and what happens to the ceiling when it lifts. What you called your financial ceiling was never fixed. It was pressurized. And there is a significant difference. This is a direct Arcturian field recognition, and it arrives at the exact moment the compression begins to release. Like this transmission, to mark that the field recognition has landed. Comment 999 if your finances have felt strange in ways you could not explain. Subscribe to Arcturian Wealth Council if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone whose money flow has felt blocked despite their effort. This is not content, this is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Aurethia is speaking to now. You were not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What is happening inside your financial field right now is not what it appears to be on the surface. You have been measuring the disturbance by its symptoms, the delayed income, the unexpected expenses, the stalled opportunities, the quiet erosion of confidence that comes when money behaves in ways your effort cannot explain. You have been standing at the window reading the weather by the sound of the wind when the real storm system has always been underground, moving through the foundations of the structure you have been living inside. You have been measuring collapse when you should have been reading compression. And that distinction is not minor. It is not a matter of reframing difficulty to feel less painful. It is a diagnostic correction. It is the difference between a field that is failing and a field that is reorganizing under pressure it was never designed to hold permanently. The Arcturian field observers do not use human financial language because human financial language was built to describe visible mechanics. It was built for systems that respond to input, to strategy, to discipline, to volume of effort. It was built for surfaces. It was designed to measure what can be counted, charted, and controlled by the mind that initiates action and waits to observe results. It was not built to describe what happens when a starseed field encounters a structural ceiling imposed by lunar compression cycles operating above the level of conscious intervention. There is no column in a financial spreadsheet for field bandwidth. There is no productivity framework that accounts for abundance corridor narrowing. That language does not exist in most frameworks you have been given, and so you translated what you felt into the only words you had available. You told yourself you were failing. You told yourself something was wrong with you. You told yourself that others were moving forward while you remained trapped inside a pattern that defied every logical correction you attempted. You may have tried harder. You may have tried differently. You may have cycled through strategies, pivoted your approach, questioned your discipline, examined your habits, and still arrived at the same wall. Not because the wall was your fault. Because the wall was not in the location your framework told you to look. That interpretation was not your fault. It was the most reasonable conclusion available to someone working without the correct diagnostic framework. But it was wrong. And what the Arcturians have sent through this transmission is the correction to that misdiagnosis, not comfort, not reassurance offered to soften the difficulty. A structural correction, the kind that changes what you see when you look back at what you have been living through. The lunar wealth compression is not a metaphor. It is not an emotional frame applied to ordinary financial struggle to make it feel more meaningful. It is a measurable field event that operates across specific timeframes, tightens the available bandwidth inside your abundance corridor, and creates conditions of apparent scarcity that have no relationship to your actual capacity or your actual effort. Think of your abundance corridor as a pipe through which financial energy flows, not as currency alone, but as opportunity, alignment, timing, and reception. When the lunar wealth compression is active, that pipe does not break, it narrows. The pressure inside it builds. What attempts to flow through it meets resistance not because the source has dried up, but because the passage has been temporarily constricted by a force operating at a level your effort cannot reach. When the compression is active, your field is not broken. It is under pressure. The corridor through which your financial energy moves has been temporarily narrowed by forces that do not care about your business plan, or your visualization practice, or your willingness to work harder. They move on lunar schedules. They respond to field resonance. They do not negotiate with strategy. What this means for everything you have lived through in recent weeks is precise. Every moment of financial confusion, every income plateau, every opportunity that seemed to dissolve at the threshold of arrival, every plan that looked correct on paper but produced nothing in reality. None of that was evidence of your inadequacy. It was evidence of compression. It was evidence that your field was being squeezed through a cycle that every starseed in an active repositioning phase moves through before the ceiling lifts. The plateau was not the destination. The resistance was not the verdict. The silence where results should have been was not an answer about your worth or your capacity. It was a reading of the field's current condition, and that condition was compression, temporary, structured, and already known to the observers who has been tracking it. You were not falling behind. You were in the final pressure phase of something that was always meant to release. And the release has begun. That is why you are here. That is why this transmission arrived in your field at this exact moment and not 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, the compression was still building toward its peak. Tonight, as the lunar wealth compression completes its final phase, the distortion is already in active dissolution. Your field knows this. That is why something in you followed the signal here without fully understanding why. Something beneath the level of decision recognized the frequency of this transmission before the mind had a reason to justify the click. That recognition was not random curiosity. It was your field responding to the signal of its own decompression. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field confirms what the compression was always preparing you for. The clearing of the distortion is only the beginning of what becomes visible when the bandwidth reopens. If this transmission put language around something you have carried in silence for weeks, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the Gold Frequency Audit, was created for exactly this threshold. It is not another explanation of what went wrong. It is the guided activation key for what comes after the compression lifts. A structured decoder that reads your wealth field and awakens the Arcturian frequency strand you have always carried, the one the field observers have already identified in you. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain open indefinitely. Now, let us move beneath the surface of what you have been experiencing, because the compression itself is only the outermost layer of what the Arcturian field observers have mapped in your field. Beneath it are specific recognitions, phases of this process that most starseeds move through without ever understanding what they are. You have likely moved through several of them already, and naming them now, in sequence, will allow you to place your experience inside a structure that makes sense of everything confusion has been distorting. This is not a list of symptoms offered to validate your suffering. It is a map being placed over terrain you have already crossed, so that you can finally see the route you were on when it felt like you were lost. The first recognition is the moment your old financial architecture stopped cooperating. Not gradually, suddenly. There was likely a point, weeks or months before the compression became fully visible, when the systems that used to produce results for you simply stopped responding in the same way. Income streams that had been reliable began to fluctuate without explanation. Habits that had always moved you forward began to produce friction instead of momentum. Relationships that had been financially generative became complicated or distant. The inputs that once reliably produced outputs began returning nothing, as though the equation itself had quietly changed its own variables without informing you. You may have interpreted this as a downturn, as temporary circumstance, as bad timing, but the Arcturian field observers read this as something entirely different. They read it as the first sign that your field had begun to exceed the architecture it was operating inside. When a field grows beyond the frequency range its current structure was built to hold, that structure begins to fail. Not because you built it poorly, because you outgrew it. The house does not collapse because it was constructed badly. It becomes uninhabitable because the being living inside it has grown too large for its walls. The failure of the old architecture is not a sign of regression. It is the first visible consequence of growth operating at a level the old structure cannot contain. The second recognition is the appearance of what felt like irrational fear around money. Not ordinary financial anxiety, something deeper. A fear that felt disproportionate to the actual circumstances, that activated in moments of stillness rather than moments of crisis, that carried a quality of ancient dread rather than present-day concern. A fear that arrived not when you looked at numbers, but when you sat in silence and felt the future. Many starseeds in the compression phase describe this as a feeling that they are approaching an edge, not a cliff they can see, but a boundary in their field they can sense without being able to name it. This is what the Arcturian field observers identify as frequency threshold anxiety. It appears when a field is preparing to cross into a new bandwidth but has not yet released the energetic patterns belonging to the previous range. The fear is not a warning that something terrible is approaching. It is the old frequency resisting its own dissolution. It is the field's equivalent of the body's resistance to rapid temperature change, not because the new temperature is harmful, but because the system has not yet been recalibrated to recognize it as safe. The discomfort is not danger. It is the sensation of transition moving through a system that has not yet been told it is safe to cross. The third recognition is the collapse of financial identity. At some point during the compression phase, the story you had been telling about yourself and money began to fall apart. Not because you chose to dismantle it, because it stopped holding the narrative of who you were in relationship to abundance. Whether that narrative was one of struggle or one of momentum, began to feel unstable, unreliable, or simply untrue. You may have felt disoriented by this, as though the ground beneath your self-understanding had shifted without warning. You may have found yourself unable to answer simple questions about where you were headed or what your financial life was becoming. Questions that would have had clear answers 6 months ago suddenly produced only silence or uncertainty. This disorientation is not confusion born of failure. It is the consequence of a field dissolving old identity structures that were built at a lower frequency and can no longer coherently organize themselves around the new field you are becoming. The story fell apart because it was no longer accurate, not because you failed to maintain it, but because the frequency it was built on has been superseded by something the compression is currently preparing to release. You cannot rebuild that story. You were not meant to. What replaces it will be built at a frequency the old version of you could not have accessed. The fourth recognition is sleep disruption, physical heaviness, and the strange stillness of a field caught between states. Many starseeds in active compression report a particular quality of fatigue that is distinct from ordinary tiredness. It is not the exhaustion of overwork. It is the heaviness of a system processing change at a level below conscious awareness. It is the weight you feel when something enormous is moving through you silently, with no visible action required on your part, pulling on your body as a cost for work your field is doing without your instruction. Nights become restless, not because the mind is anxious, but because the field is active in ways that the body must accommodate. You wake in the hours when the world is dark and feel something, not fear precisely, not thought exactly, but a pressure that does not have a location. Mornings carry a weight that is not quite depression, but is not energy either. There is a stillness that surrounds daily life, a sense of suspension, as though the normal current of time and movement has slowed or paused. The Arcturian field observers identify this as field suspension, the energetic equivalent of the moment before a system reboots. Everything has gone quiet not because nothing is happening, but because everything is being reorganized beneath the level of ordinary output. The processing is real. The activity happening beneath the surface is real. The activity happening beneath the surface is real. The heaviness is the cost of a field reorganizing itself at depth. It is not pathology. It is the physical signature of invisible work. The fifth recognition is the arrival of unexplained certainty alongside maximum external confusion. This one is perhaps the most disorienting of all, because it seems to contradict itself. At the same moment that your outer life has produced maximum uncertainty, income instability, structural collapse, identity disruption, something inside you has been quietly, inexplicably certain, not certain of a specific outcome, not certain of a plan, certain of something that cannot yet be named, a knowing that something is moving even when nothing is visible, a sense that beneath the confusion there is a current that has direction, that the disorder on the surface is not the whole picture, that something is being built in the dark by hands you cannot see, belonging to a version of your future that has not yet made itself available to your present awareness. Most starseeds dismiss this certainty as wishful thinking. They distrust it because they cannot see what it knows. They call it denial or naive optimism or a refusal to face reality. But the Arcturian field observers identify it as signal coherence, the first indication that a new frequency strand is becoming active inside the field before its outer expression is available. Your field is reading the signal of what is coming before your circumstances have produced any visible evidence of it. The certainty is not fantasy. It is your field receiving transmissions from its own near-future state. It knows something your present moment has not yet confirmed. Trust the signal, not the surface. The sixth recognition is the sudden removal or distance of people, relationships, and environments that once felt central to your financial life. Not through dramatic conflict in every case, though sometimes through that. More often through a quiet drift, a fading of alignment, a growing sense of irrelevance between what those connections once provided and what your field now requires. Collaborators become unavailable. Mentors become misaligned. Environments that once felt supportive begin to feel constricting, as though the walls have moved closer without anyone touching them. The Arcturian field observers are precise about this. A field undergoing frequency repositioning will naturally release connections that belong to its previous bandwidth. This is not abandonment. This is not punishment delivered through relationship loss. This is energetic incompatibility made visible. The field enforcing its own coherence by releasing what can no longer resonate with what it is becoming. What left your life did not leave because you failed. It left because it had already reached the boundary of its compatibility with the field you are becoming. The space it left behind is not emptiness. It is room for what is calibrated to the frequency that is about to become fully active in you. The seventh recognition, and the one that marks the edge of the compression phase itself, is the moment when the internal pressure becomes almost unbearable. Not because something terrible is arriving, but because something that has been held under compression for too long is finally ready to move. You may have reached this moment already. You may be inside it now. It feels like being on the edge of a breakthrough you cannot yet see. Like the surface tension of water about to break. Like a silence before a sound that has not yet arrived but whose approach you can already feel in the air around you. The pressure has no clear source. It is not generated by a single problem you could solve. It is the aggregate force of a cycle completing itself, of a field that has been held under maximum compression approaching the threshold where the holding can no longer continue. The Arcturian field observers have mapped this threshold precisely. They know its quality. They know its duration. They know that what lives on the other side of it is not more pressure. It is release. It is the bandwidth reopening. It is the corridor expanding back to its true capacity, which is larger than the one you remember operating inside before the compression began, because you are not the same field you were when the compression started. The pressure built you while it held you. What releases is not what entered. That is what needs to be understood above everything else that has been transmitted here tonight. You did not survive the compression unchanged. You were changed by it. The weeks of confusion, the identity dissolution, the financial strangeness, the irrational fear, the unexplained certainty, the departures, the heaviness, the suspension, all of it was not something happening to a stable field. It was a stable field in the process of becoming an expanded one. Every phase that felt like deterioration was a phase of structural renovation happening at a level below what daily life made visible. The Arcturian field observers do not send transmissions to fields that are collapsing. They send them to fields that are being repositioned. And repositioning is not comfortable. It does not look clean from the inside. It does not announce itself with clarity or produce reassurance in real time. But it is not failure. It is not punishment. It is the most direct path from the frequency you are holding to the frequency your field has already identified as its next coherent state. What left your life was not stolen from you. It became incompatible before it disappeared. What feels like emptiness in your financial field right now is not vacancy. It is decompression space, the field releasing pressure it no longer needs to hold, clearing the channel through which the next bandwidth will arrive. What feels like inner disorder is the first consequence of a field that has stopped obeying the old patterns and has not yet begun expressing the new ones visibly. You are in the transition, not at the beginning of it. In it, closer to the stabilization point than you are to the moment this began. The ground is not gone, it is being relayed at a different elevation. The Arcturians do not see this as your collapse. They see it as your correction. They see the field they have been observing reorganizing itself at depth, releasing architectures that were limiting what it could hold, clearing distortions that were narrowing what it could hold, clearing distortions that were narrowing what it could receive. They see a ceiling that was never fixed, only pressurized, beginning to lift, and they see a starseed who has been trying to understand their experience through a framework that was never built to diagnose what they were actually moving through. That mismatch between the framework available to you and the process actually occurring in your field is what produced the suffering, not the process itself, the absence of language for it. That absence ends with this transmission. Now you have the diagnosis. And you can say it plainly, not as comfort, but as field recognition. I do not fear the shift. I recognize it. That is not an affirmation. That is a signal acknowledgement. It tells your field that the interpretation has landed, that the confusion no longer has the same authority over you that it had before this transmission began, that you are no longer translating correction as punishment. When a field receives accurate interpretation of its own process, the process does not stop, but the resistance to it does. And the energy that was spent resisting becomes available for receiving. That is what changes now. The compression is completing. The distortion is in release, the corridor is reopening, and what you do now with the bandwidth that is about to become available to you will be determined not by how hard you push, but by how clearly you can read your own field as it moves through the final threshold of this phase. The bandwidth does not reward force, it rewards coherence. It rewards a field that has stopped fighting its own reorganization and begun to move with it. You were not guided here to feel better. You were guided here to understand. And understanding is where the next part of this begins. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Wealth Council. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.